Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show, we talk about TV shows that are dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Devils. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we finally get at least some insight into Sophia's past, understanding why she has it out for Dominic. And it's because her brother ended up killing himself, it's like 10 years ago in the confines of the story, because the series takes place in 2011. This was like in 2001. But basically, stuff was going down in Argentina and people were trying to get their money out of the bank, but the bank didn't have the money to give people their money, so they were giving out small amounts. So it's like, I have like 2,000 in the bank. It's like, but you're only getting 20. Everyone's only getting 20. And her brother was so desperate, he took the gun off a security guard and pointed and says, give me my money. But it's like, the banks don't have the money to pay you. All your money is going, like, we can only give you the little, it's the only compensation you get. And he ended up killing himself. And Sophia was there. He didn't realize Sophia had followed him. He told her to go back home, but she followed him and witnessed that firsthand. And obviously you can see that, because what I'm wondering is, like, when we see Sophia again, she's looking at a file, because she was looking at videos of her and her brother, and then she's looking at like a newspaper article or whatever, saying that basically Dominic made a killing while Argentina was in its crisis. So I guess because of just all the bank stuff that he's done, probably selling short, like whatever the case may be, either it's because he used whatever devious and, illicit tactics to cause things to go bad. I mean, because obviously it's probably like one bank taking down another bank and making a killing because things are going to falter on that side of things. Whatever the case may be, it didn't seem like there was necessarily anything written there that directly correlates it, but who knows if, because like I said, I looked at that and assumed that was supposed to be Sophia before she, went searching for justice. Maybe this is before she got with Saturnia, or maybe it's when she did. I'm assuming, like, maybe this is just her older, and now, obviously her and Daniel were kind of having issues last episode, so maybe this is just reaffirming, like, no, I got to do this, I got to keep my eye on the prize, my Moby Dick, my white whale is going to be taking down Dominic. Obviously, this is a personal vendetta for her. So obviously, while this is all going down, obviously the cops are continuing to look into Ed's death, because now they know that, hey, it was a murder. And lo and behold, you have Chris, who's pointing Massimo in their direction. They're already looking at Massimo anyway, but even more so now, because Chris is like, oh yeah, this and that, to the point they even call in Massimo later on. And obviously for him, it's like, all you're doing is because me and the dude didn't get along, that's all you have. Because I'm sure, like, there's plenty of people in that building that don't, like each other. But it's like, that's all you really have. You don't have any evidence that actually proves I did it. But they're so sure that it is Massimo, because I think they already had it in their mind. And obviously the evidence is just adding more to that, Something I thought was kind of an interesting element to this too. It's like, obviously Massimo doesn't tell his team. It comes out later and it's like, when were you going to tell us that the cops are looking at you for Ed's death? It's like, that is the thing. Like, why isn't he telling, like, you're supposed to be a team, you're supposed to be a squad. It's not the thing of like, we're a family, we're in this together. It's like, no, you work for me. I'm not in a position where I have to tell you everything. You are in a position to listen to me. That's what it seems like this dynamic kind of made it pretty damn clear. I mean, I guess, that also led to the whole Paul situation, because Paul ends up turning on Massimo, and he, and it's like, for him, it's like, I think he even said, like, he was working at the bank for like 10 years, and it's like Massimo turned his back on him. So it's like, yeah, he probably did it too. It's like he, Paul is in vent, like, obviously he got kicked out of his house, so he's kind of living in like a hotel room or whatever. But it's like, this is just his way to get back at Massimo for screwing him. It's like, you consider yourself probably pals, and Massimo kind of looked after you, but now it's like, he screwed you over, even though you screwed him over first. I mean, you're the one going behind his back, connected to all the, because I guess in his defense, Paul didn't really know but I mean, he knew like this whole thing related to Carrie and stuff like that. Like, and it's like, you were reporting all this behind my back. Like, that's it's supposed to be trust between us, whether or not we're not a family, but at least there's some, mutual trust we had, and you broke that. So, but I'm curious to see where things kind of go on the Paul front, especially now that Massimo knows it was Paul that was running the mouth. Hell, even knows it was Chris running his mouth. And obviously, you know, Chris was antagonizing him. He's like, oh yeah, that everyone knows about that whore wife of yours. And like Massimo was beating the shit out of it. But the whole point was to, you know, show everyone to be like, oh yeah, this is going to make you look even more guilty. Look at my bloody face. It's like, oh, you're done. And obviously it seems like Chris is doing all this because he wants that position, which I think is so interesting considering all that Massimo did short of murdering someone to get that job. You know, the whole hit back and forth between him and the whole thing with him and Ed. But it's just interesting now. It's like the shoes on the other foot when it comes to that job, you know? So I wonder, is it just a personal thing, or is it just purely like, oh, I want the job, or is it just kind of like, I don't like Massimo either. So like, I'm just, not only do I want the job, so I'm going to screw you over, I also don't like you, so I'm going to screw you over doubly more. You know, that's what I'm curious about with that whole, situation. Obviously, like, his team wasn't too happy about, like, the fact is, like, you know, because apparently, like, there's this whole thing where it's like Chris is overseeing, like, there's a certain word for it, but basically it's like you can't really do any, like, it's a situation. I think you're only allowed to do so much, meaning that they take heavy hits. They could be making a lot of money, but they're being boxed in so that they can't. And obviously, it's like without Paul there's even less money coming in from that group. So they're giving less to the bank, meaning that they're making less off of this as well, you know. But Massimo, it's like, because of everything going on, we need to be, you know, follow the rules, because obviously it's like the whole him and Dominic thing, like Dominic's suspicious of him and kind of telling him to stay in his lane, and he's kind of doing that because he's, you know, waiting for his opportunity to strike. But obviously the others go to Oliver to do some, you know, shenanigans with computer stuff, and he does it, and so they're starting to make money, because this also deals with like what was it, like Irish housing stuff, like, because it deals with like bonds. It's, once again, this is like the complicated thing that it's such technical stuff that I have to rewind the episode a couple of times because I'm not getting everything, because I'm an idiot. Sorry. If you didn't know, now you know. But basically it was this interesting thing that basically, like, there were, like, the bank was in a position where it would basically have to cover these bonds. The government would have to cover the bank, because if they didn't, basically the bank would go under, and it would basically, I think, it would tank basically people's what's pension, healthcare, money, like stuff like that, because basically there's so many other governments like tied into this, because it's about basically the Central European Bank. Basically, they want the Irish bank, they want the government to bail out this Irish government, because if they don't, like, everything's going to go under, because the way Massimo kind of puts it later on is that basically, because he went to go see that dude who gave Oliver the position of like, oh yeah, go, Massimo needs someone, because I guess that's like his mentor and everything, that taught him everything, and he's teaching the class, which that was interesting too, because he was talking about like a war where basically the U.S. kind of stayed out of it. But to kind of screw over Europe, they basically, it's like, yeah, it's not weapons that make, you know, or it's power, it's financing. It's the real ultimate weapon in battle, you know, because basically he ended up, like, the U.S. ended up tanking, like, Europe's, like, money or something, so they kind of had to pull out their troops for, I forgot, was it they were invading Israel or something? I don't remember. It was something in the 50s. They were invading someone, and basically the U.S. doing what it did kind of put them in a position where it's like, we don't have the money to keep funding this, so like pull the troops back, probably because it's also like, as long as we are still here, the U.S. is going to continue effing with our money, so we need to pull back, you know. So I think it's a really interesting and, you know, technical side of things. What was also interesting too is with the whole right. Let me go back a second. I kind of lost myself. The point I was actually trying to make before. The whole point was like that basically, by the government's willing to, they're basically the European banks or whatever are basically, to ensure that they're okay, they're willing to tank all this other stuff of people's monies and stuff like that, because it's basically, because as Oliver kind of puts it, it's basically robbery. It's because it's actually cheaper to kind of bail out, like having the government bail out this bank, rather than just kind of paying out like the money that would actually be owed for the bonds and stuff like that. So that was just kind of like the like, it's a cost reward type of situation. It's like, okay, which situation is not going to hurt us as much financially? It's like this way, so we're going to do that. We're screwing over a lot of people, and who cares? Are we robbing a lot of people? Sure, but not too many people are going to know, so we're going to keep this on the low. Because obviously this is tied into like what Dominic's up to, because the deals he had in place, that guy's like, yeah, like someone from financing is kind of like someone higher up finance wise, it's like telling us that we can't take the chance of be working on this, keeping up this end of the bargain, because if we do, like, it's unnecessary eyes on us type of thing, so we have to keep this low key, so we have to end the deal right now. But it's like, for him, it's like, no, my deal with you, it's kind of its own thing. It has nothing to do with everything that's going on, but it's like kind of does. So Dominic kind of goes and takes care of things personally. So there's that. What I was also about to bring up earlier before I went back to my previous point was the whole thing with Sophia. Obviously, Daniel's giving her another shot. That basically she's meeting with this reporter who's leaking stuff. And it turns out that LIA, all that stuff last episode, it's like you kind of nailed it, but at the same time, you were pointing at the wrong person. NYL isn't directly connected to LIA in that regard, because she was trying to connect like Gaddafi to NYL. But in actuality, NYL is working with the government, saying that all those pictures that went out, like that we saw, it's like all those videos, all those pictures, they were fake. It's like, no, we saw the graves. It's like, at first he was saying like, almost like, oh, it's footage from years. I guess it's like they used old footage, and he was kind of making it seem like they basically digitally inserted dead bodies or something like that. And it's like, why is that? It's like, well, because in fact, the NYL doesn't just work for like the U.S. government, it works for someone even higher up in the government. And it's like, well, why would they do all that? And that's obviously like the number one question, like, because it was all to put this position for, like, I guess so the military could come in and take out Gaddafi. I guess was kind of like the whole, like, they could have an excuse for military interference, but it's like, for what purpose? I mean, that's the thing about this whole thing, about, because obviously it's like we're dealing with like high up powerful people, once again, as Daniel had said it, like these people who are like gods. I keep saying Daniel. His name is Daniel, right? Dude from Subternia. I'm terrible with names sometimes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But it's like, just like the fact of the matter is, it shows you like how a bank, as well as, a dude like Dominic, basically can help alter the world in ways you just don't know. I mean, that's the power of like the high elite, and they make moves that can break a country or make a country to a certain extent, and make a lot of money or drain people of a lot of their money. And so it's a interesting effed up, thing. But what was interesting is obviously like Massimo isn't really listening to, he doesn't want to talk to Sophia, but Sophia ends up going back to her reporter friend and trying to get information on Carrie, because she would say basically she can get information from him about Carrie. She can give it to Massimo, kind of build that trust back up between them, because she also needs Massimo. It's, obviously, because it's like, well, we both kind of want the same thing. You're kind of looking at Dominic a certain way. I want Dominic taken care of, so it's kind of like we're allies in this. So, it's a means to an end. And I think she sees something in Massimo, because I think for her, she sees that Massimo's kind of a victim of Dominic's, much like her family situation was, with her brother. So I think that's kind of what inspires it. But maybe it's that, or maybe she's telling herself is that. Maybe it's just purely, you're a piece on the chessboard I can use to take down the king that is Dominic. I'm curious about that, because Massimo had hired a guy to look into this stuff, but he couldn't find anything on Carrie. Gets brought in by a dude, and the dude's like, oh yeah, like tell Massimo you didn't find anything, and you get all this money. Oh, you got an ex-wife, you got a kid, you got all this alimony you need to take care of, child support. Yeah, we'll cover it for you if you continue to tell him you found nothing. But then, like, obviously, we find out, well, at least Sophia kind of reveals that Carrie was arrested for like prostitution in, was it Virginia, like a year ago or something like that. And that basically, Massimo was like, I couldn't find the files. Why was that? Oh, it's because the guy who buried those files, he's a lawyer, and who's his number one client? Dominic. So showing that Dominic is the one that kind of set this all in motion. Because obviously, like, because there's also the thing too that Dominic's pissed when Massimo reveals, like, oh yeah, Chris told the cops that I'm the one that killed Ed, and he's like, I'm gonna take care of this, because obviously you would never kill anyone. Obviously, despite this situation when you and Chris, you punching him like that, like he's like, I'll take care of this, I'll make it kind of go away. But he got pissed. Now part of me wonders, is like, it's probably because he wants his Ed situation to go away. The last thing he needs is investigations, because cops looking into Massimo is probably going to look into other stuff at the bank, and it's like, I don't need a... So Chris doesn't realize the shady, like him doing whatever he needs to sway this situation in his favor is screwing things over. So I'm sure Dominic's not going to appreciate that. Or maybe it is a thing of like him and Chris had an understanding, but Chris overstepped his boundaries and went behind Dominic's back to kind of spin this to take down Massimo. Like, so either like, it's just, it probably went for, like, Dominic probably didn't want things to go to the level that they are now, like, but maybe it was just kind of meant, because he wanted to keep Massimo in check, because there's a whole thing of like, oh yeah, there's a mole at the company, and I guess he's like, well, he knows, it's like, oh yeah, it's right in front of me, he knows it's Massimo. I'm sure but like, obviously, like, he's pissed at Chris too. Like, maybe there's something else there to it. What's also sucky though is Chris has video of Oliver doing what he did. So it's like, oh, that's going to come back to bite him in the ass. Because obviously Massimo was pissed when they were like, yeah, actually, we've been shortened, even though we told you we weren't going to. He's like, what? He's like, no, I told you to. It's like, yeah, we know you told us. But it's like, Oliver is like, he's the one that did it. But Kate was like, no, we all kind of pushed him to do it. So that's just kind of, the interesting aspect of that whole situation. And obviously the cops, calling Massimo more in, because obviously like his Ed's wife had found more. But luckily Massimo is still in Dominic's good graces, so he pulls some strings to get the cops to let him. Well, basically it's being a different group of investigators. It's like a different crime unit is going to be taking over the case now. And once again, Dominic's not doing it necessarily because he likes and trusts Massimo's. It's self-preservation. Saving Massimo saves you from some heartache and pain and investigations later on. But Massimo's like, you're going to basically kick your asses later on when you figure out I'm not the one behind Ed. It's like, you give me those files and I can decipher them and figure out what this is all about. Which is like, yeah, Massimo didn't kill Ed, so... It's going to be interesting to see, It does seem like, circling back to it, Sophia's, she was able to kind of mend fences with Massimo, because she's like, I understand, like, not being able to kind of end on the best terms. So it's like, obviously, like, her, like, having regrets, not being able to say what you want to say to that person you lost. In his case, Carrie. In her case, her brother, so... That was kind of fascinating. But also, it seems like every episode we go by, it seems like Massimo's team, it's becoming more and more obviously they're questioning his leadership. Granted, now it's like, oh, he's potentially being investigated for murder. So it's like, yeah. Obviously Paul's, situation, I'm sure that makes him kind of look at it from a certain point of view of like, oh, could we get, will we get the axe next or not? So, I'm curious, because obviously Nina seems like she already has issues with Dominic. She doesn't like the way he operates. She kind of plays a wife of like, smiles and everything, but part of me wonders, does she know? No. Because it's probably the thing of like, she knows he's capable a lot, but she's probably not sure if he's... Because that's the whole question, like, did he actually push Ed himself? It's Dominic, you would assume he got someone else to do it, but there's always... Because I'm sure that he needs some separation. He needs a scapegoat in case it ever comes his way. But, I mean, who knows? Maybe there's a situation where he actually did do it himself just because he let his anger get the best of him. I don't know. Like I said, I don't believe he did it himself. I'm sure someone else did, but, we'll see. The dude who kind of handles stuff for him, the dude that was blackmailing Paul, I'm sure that's the dude that potentially killed Ed. But, we'll kind of have to wait and see. I am curious to see ultimately, where all of this, these new discoveries and everything end up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good